Welcome. Aloha. Thanks for joining us in ThinkTech Hawaii. Rule of law in the new abnormal, whatever that may be. Lord save us from normal, right? Today we have with us some absolutely wonderful, experienced, insightful people. Professor Emerita Vernellia Randall from the University of Dayton School of Law, Tina Patterson, mediator, arbitrator, consultant in Maryland, and David Larson, media past chair of the American Bar Association section of dispute resolution and professor at Mitchell Hamlin School of Law in St. Paul. We'll be with you and join you folks in just one sec. Okay, welcome. Professor Randall, David, Tina, democracy remains under attack in so many ways, including now whether the U.S. is going to default on its debts and basically undermine its entire economy and international economic relations and political relations. So what's at risk? What needs to be done to protect us? Professor Randall, you can start us off.
Well, first of all, I have to put my caveat. I don't believe we have a democracy. I never believed we never had a democracy because we've never allowed everyone in our country to vote and to participate in a democracy. And so that caveat said, what we call a democracy is being dismantled and has been for years. I think over the last 50 years of my life, it's not something, I think it's rushing towards dismantling in the last 15 or 20 years. But the problems, of not having voters' rights, not protecting, not allowing the rich to have undue influence on what laws get passed. Those are all, to my mind, how our so-called democracy is moving closer to being something else.
And we've seen lots of examples of that. Just a week or so ago, we saw where if Rupert Murdoch can pay $800 million, he can avoid having a trial on all the damage they tried to do by undermining the election results and attempting to reverse the election results. How anti-democratic is that? Tina, your thoughts? Where do you start, right?
Yes, where do you start? But I also think this is more or less out of the same playbook that was outlined in the 2018 book, How Democracies Die. This concept of lack of mutual toleration is being played out now in the economic space. And for those who think, oh, it's not a big deal, the crumbling of the U.S. budget impacts us not just with congressional issues or at the federal level, but it impacts those who are seeking unemployment, those who serve in our military, and those who receive other services from the federal government. We normally see this in the short term as sequestration for 2 or 3 weeks, but we did have a period in which the government could not agree on a budget, and we actually saw how this started impacting people on a much longer term basis. And I think people were shocked to see just how much those federal funds were used at the local level. If we want a repeat performance, we're about to see it. But I think this is just another chapter, another page turner in terms of how democracies die. The Congress doesn't have to be in this position. We should not be waiting until April, nearly May, to determine what we're going to do with our budget and the budget ceiling.
So that's a great point. So it kind of raises the question, is it possible for Kevin McCarthy to get a House vote that will allow raising the debt ceiling without major harm to the U.S. economy and international relations.
First of all, the thing is we're one of the few developed countries that do this. We're one of the few rich countries to do this. Most very rich countries pass their debt ceiling with the budget, so that you never have to go back and say, let's pass the debt ceiling, because when you pass the budget, that sort of is automatically. The question is, why have this thing has played out my whole lifetime. So I have never seen an instance in my life, and I'm in my mid-70s, I've never seen an instance where there isn't an argument over the debt ceiling, both Democrats and Republicans, because they both use it as a political tool to get something they want. The difference now is because we've got there's a very narrow margin, and we have these very conservative right-wing people who are bound and determined to use passing the budget as a way to do something they've always pushed for. Cutting government down to a size so that be small. And these are words they have used in the past. It'll be small enough to kill in a bathtub. And that's what they want to get rid of socialists. They want to get rid of everything but military for the most part. And so they want to use this as an opportunity to get the Democrats to have to agree to cut domestic spending, even though they didn't cut military spending, which is one of the things they could have done to assure that that spending would be down.
Now, Professor Randall, I think, makes an excellent point about how the debt ceiling is used as a political tool. As we have this conversation, we shouldn't forget that McCarthy voted 3 times to raise the debt ceiling under the Trump administration. So now he's turning around and asking, like, you can't ever raise the debt ceiling, when in his early breath, not that long ago, he did it 3 times. What's going to happen with democracy? We may have reached the point, I think, that we have to consider having the viability of more than 2 parties. One of the problems is we've got a Republican Party that's led by somebody whose main thesis is that our electoral system isn't fair, and that preaches it over and over and over and over again. And if you want to be a Republican, apparently you have to believe that. You have to embrace that the electoral system doesn't work. And to kind of be relegated to that choice, it's that if I want the other policies I believe in to be forwarded, I guess I got to buy in on selection thing. That's pretty unfortunate, and that's pretty damning, and that's pretty restrictive. That we actually may have reached the point that we need more than 2 viable political parties. And if you have that, then your 2 more dominant parties will have to be a little more flexible to address the challenges and the good ideas coming from these other parties. So when we're thinking about saving democracy, one thing I've been thinking about is maybe we need to be serious about how we can expand our choices and have more than 2 political parties. And the other thing that everybody's been talking about is, we're losing faith in government on a lot of different levels. And we have lots of examples. And one of the most recent ones is the ones with Justice Clarence Thomas, where it's just literally jaw-dropping what he did, and how much money he took from this Republican donor who, even if he didn't personally have a case before the U.S. Supreme Court, his interests were continually before the U.S. Supreme Court. Estimates are raising $500,000. I mean, these massive trips, private yachts, private planes. The fact that we don't have a good judicial code for the United States Supreme Court is pretty much appalling. And the idea that people have lifetime appointments and no judicial code of conduct, you put those two things together and you get Clarence Thomas. That's what you get. So, the other thing to think about is in terms of, and again, we can talk about lots of things, but as quickly as possible, getting the judicial code of conduct that covers the Supreme Court, number one, and then maybe consider term limits. And maybe this idea of, you get it the rest of your life, and you have that kind of immunity. I think it's a little challenging. And I'm not so sure we need to give those kinds of appointments, the lifetime appointments. So there's a couple ideas to think about.
Professor Larson, you're singing music to my ears when you talked about more than one party, since I'm a socialist and have always felt like the problem with the United States political system is the two parties. Unfortunately, the Democrats and Republicans have worked together to make it almost, and just recently, they both have done things to make together to make it impossible for third parties to rise, to have an effective voice, both in requiring certain number of signatures, requiring a certain number of money to get on ballots, and excluding them. I remember when the Democrats and Republicans took over the League of Women Voters debate that they used to have for presidential candidates, because they didn't like the debate rules, including the fact that non-Democrats and Republicans could participate in it. And so if the people only hear from Democrats and Republicans during debate stage, then that's the only ideas they're going to have. And I don't know, with the Democrats and Republicans controlling Congress, the Democrats and Republicans controlling in states, controlling the legislature, the governorship, I truly don't see how we can move to an effective, being a member of a third party and vote and not voting them. I don't know how we move there when the people are going to make laws to make it ineffective. I think we would need a constitutional amendment and that has its own source of problems to try to make third parties be able to have a voice, an effective voice in the elections.
That's kind of, that's inherent. That's an inherent conflict that, it's right now I've got a binary choice, so I got a 50% chance of winning no matter what. I don't want 3 or 4 people that's going to make it harder for me to win. So there's absolutely no question that the Republicans and Democrats have a vested interest in the two-party system because it makes it easier for them to win the election. They got a 50% chance. So yes, we need an explicit recognition of the fact that they are not going to be friendly to this because of their own interest. And whatever we're going to do to expand our opportunities and choices, it's got to be explicit that there's going to be resistance. It's going to be suspect, and we got to be as transparent as possible about all these efforts that might be coming and have already happened to make it more difficult to get these additional voices.
Professor Larson, my point is that they will make laws that will get upheld by the Supreme Court, whether that Supreme Court is considered conservative and liberal, that makes it impossible third parties have been around. The problem becomes that there's no way for them to gain an effective voice because laws and policies are made to make sure that they cannot have an effective voice. Go ahead. I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
thanks.
Patterson.
Tina, you had some thoughts that you were ready to share.
Well, no, it's not necessarily a thought. It's a question to both professors, and that is, I suppose my question to you is: so, which is the higher priority? Is it to really take a look at the judicial conduct and start with the term limits for the justices, or is it bringing in the third party system? If Professor Randall, what you're saying is true, even if there were a third party, and there have been, they are limited or constrained by current laws. So do we start with the judiciary cleanup, or do we move forward with the third parties? And I agree, we should have a third party. I know that oftentimes, and I think this is part of that rhetoric as well, for those who are socialists or do not claim to be a part of either party, a socialist is confused with being a communist, is confused with being a libertarian, and people don't know the difference. But but nevertheless, you've got these rules in place. So my first question is to you: which becomes the priority? Is it the justice?
For me, neither one is it becomes the most priority. They both are different, and they do different things. And so I would say that we can juggle, 4 or 5 balls at the same time without dropping them. So there's no reason why we can't prioritize 4 or 5 things. I would like an ethics code of conduct is going to be milquetoast at best, because they're going to make an ethics code of conduct that's something that they can fit their life into. And if Congress passed a law, they aren't going to pass a law that's going to hurt too bad, because they're not going to want to get their Congress caught. My view is expand the court significantly, and by statute, make non-Democrats and non-Republicans have to be appointed to the court, representative from recognized third party. How about that? Having third parties on the Supreme Court.
Okay. Expanding the court, I think can be reframed as expanding the courts. I mean, we have not increased federal district courts in 30 years. If we increased our number of federal district courts, that would be an opportunity to really diversify the judiciary, a lot of new appointments. So one thing I think we could do is expand our federal court system and make more judgeships available, and hopefully follow an intent to diversify the bench as we fill these vacancies. So that's one thing I think would be a substantial improvement. I would hope that would happen. In terms of a judicial code of ethics, can we get something that's rigid enough? I don't know. But between having nothing so that you could do anything you want, and having some parameters so that when you take $1 million, that's pretty clearly a problem. I mean, I prefer, even if it's not the best code, I'd rather have some code as opposed to no code.
I don't know. We've lived with no code for 50 years. I've lived with no code for 50 years. And so putting a code is not the priority for me. I mean, because it seems like window dressing, because they're never going to do enough to really stop anybody who wants to do something. I agree with you. We do really need to expand it. Most cases don't get past the district and court of appeals. And so the judges on the district court and the court of appeals have actually significant more power, because the Supreme Court's never going to deal with the issues that are being faced those courts. Now, but my problem becomes is if the district courts, first of all, the diversity on the court is not political diversity. They ain't appointing socialists. They're not appointing those kind of people like me. I mean, they're appointing Black women, but they're not appointing socialist Black women. And so I don't see that. That to me would be a huge diversity point if, in fact, the courts had to be diversity in political views and not just representing Democrat and Republican views.
Okay. And you folks have raised some really important points. And the parties have both established obstacles to anything that would enable any third party or either party from gaining and holding control. They have the filibuster, they have the blue slip system, and the blue slip system, which Illinois Senator Dick Durbin has gone along with Senator Feinstein's inability to participate, and therefore the loss of the ability of that committee to act on judicial appointments. They can't even get it to the floor of the Senate because that rule was put in place to keep third parties or either party from interfering with the two-party stalemate that has served the interests of both. Tina, your thoughts? What do we learn from How Democracy Dies that might help us understand how to deal with this stuff now?
Gosh, that's wow. In a 2-minute synopsis. The takeaway from How Democracies Die is to pay attention and to speak, to exercise the right to vote, to form coalitions, to take the actions. I think Professor Randall described it best, is to have those balls juggling. I think, and literally have multi-action taking place and looking at our system, our legislative system, also looking at our judicial system and the executive branch, and being not polarized, but moving from polarization to tolerating and working together so that we can have a right to vote, we can exercise and have a more democratic system. What's important for people to keep in mind underlying all of this is the more we see these behaviors take place that we're seeing now, the closer we move to becoming a failed nation state. And there's a list out there of failed nation states and the activities that brought them to failed nation state. And part of it is the inability of the judicial system, the legislative system, and the executive branch to do what they've been originally designed to do, and failure in each area.
Well, we got it.
Do you think we are a failed nation state already? I mean, do you think, are we already a failed nation state? We just have too much military for anybody to call us that.
Personally, Tina Patterson saying this, yes, I do. I think we teeter on being a failed nation state. In many aspects, there are countries that we have looked at and have dubbed as failed nation states that we're in the same boat with, right? And it's unfortunate to have to say that. I know, Professor Larson, you tend to be more optimistic, so I'll pause.
Well, I don't know if it's going to happen. If we get, if we can get the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act passed, it's not a big enough step, but the thing about that act says that it's unlawful not to certify the results where someone gets the most votes. That's what that says. And as we're thinking about what's happening with our democracy, I think we need to, as we go to our next election cycle, we need to pay a lot of attention to what's happening at county levels, and what's happening at local voting offices. The way a lot of states work is the first certification's got to come at a county level, and then it goes to the state level. And if you remember what happened in Michigan with Wayne County and the city of Detroit, and that first vote of 4 commissioners going 2-2, and then deciding, okay, we'll certify them, and then like a day later trying to withdraw that certification. I mean, it's crazy. That's craziness. So I think we need to pay more attention to what's happening at the county level, those certification processes. And also, I'm personally worried about all this legislation about poll workers and poll watchers. We've got legislation in Texas that protects poll watchers and gives them, quote, freedom to roam. What does that mean? that you're going to come over and look over somebody's shoulder when they're voting. I think we need to carve out some space when it comes to the actual voting process to say, look, these poll watchers are potentially intimidating. We've got to make sure that people feel secure, that their vote's going to be confidential, and we've got to pay attention to what's going on in the local polling offices with both the workers and the watchers. So, those are maybe small steps, but those are, I think, some practical things we can do.
No, and you're exactly right, because huge proportions of them are resigning because they're afraid. They're not safe, and their families are not safe. They're threatened, literally. Okay, in our last minute, last thoughts, Professor Randall?
I mean, I agree with Ms. Patterson. I think we're a failed state and been one for a long time. It's just that it hasn't been obvious to a lot of people because we wanted to believe that we had a democracy. But since we never had a democracy, what's going on is just representative of not having a democracy and having a failed constitution, all of that stuff. And I have no hopes of us. I mean, I think we can think around the edge and make ourselves feel better because we're doing something, but that something won't be effective.
Tina, last thoughts?
Professor Randall, I'm glad you agree with me, but I think there's still hope. And I have faith in our young people, and I have faith in people like the two of you who are speaking up and speaking out, that people will take action and not just sit by the wayside and waiting for the next person to do it. I'm prepared to take action. I encourage others to do so as well.
David?
Yeah, I've got a daughter we adopted in China. Who's just a wonderful person. I want her to have as positive a life as possible. So I'm not ready to resign and say that it's hopeless. I do have hope. I think things are possible. Whether we can do them, I don't know. I believe we don't have more choices than what we've got now, this kind of binary choice, with one of the choices being somebody that's a flat out election denier. And if you want to follow that party, you have to be an election denier. And if you're an election denier, that's the end of democracy. That is incredibly troubling. So, I'm focused on that right now, somehow getting past that. And maybe it's a third party, but at least making people understand the binary choice that they're making, that if you're siding on this side, you are not supporting democracy. Don't pretend you are.
No, and thanks so much, all of you, for those really valuable and important insights. And a reminder to us that if you're going to move forward, you have to move the needle from the combative, competitive to the collaborative. You have to be able to do what President Biden's election announcement stressed, is we need to come together. And one of the things that tears us down as a failed nation state is exactly those personal, venomous attacks on and fights with each other. We need to find ways to bring those to an end and to live with each other. So thank you all for the values, for the insights, for the perspectives. Thanks everybody for joining us on ThinkTech Hawaii. Come back, join us again. This is fundraising season for ThinkTech Hawaii. So please support us if you can, as you choose. Thanks so much, and aloha.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.